Friends, on Passover we eat matzah. Matzah is not known for its fantastic taste. Matzah is simple, matzah is dry. The message of matzah is humility. Matzah is telling us that humility is a key component in living a happy, successful, peaceful, and good life. But the message of humility can be very frightening. Humility seems like I got to put myself aside. Who wants humility? So let's understand what humility really is. Let's understand what Torah translates humility. When we understand what Torah's definition of humility is, we'll see that humility is not only not frightening, but humility is that ingredient which will bring so much joy and success and peace to our lives, both physical and spiritual and emotional. Throughout Kabbalah and Hasidic thought in the Tanya, it discusses that inner struggle, that conflict, which is constant within the human being. The terminology used in Kabbalah or in Tanya for this inner struggle is the fight between the godly soul and the animal soul, both trying to conquer the hearts and minds of the human being. For the sake of today's discussion, I want to coin that struggle, the struggle between the ego and the self-esteem. The ego and the self-esteem are both standing on two opposite sides of the battlefield within the human being. The ego tells the human being, be ego. Ego is all about itself. Ego is about the here and now, getting a little pleasure. The ego is excited about something. He runs for it. He knows that 5 minutes from now is going to come to haunt him, but he looks for the pleasure at the moment. There's no meaning. There's no purpose. He's looking for that pleasure. Someone tells the ego, study, learn, gain appreciation for meaning in life. He says, why? Let me enjoy this pleasure right now. I'm not looking for anything deeper. Ego is always worried. Ego is never satisfied. Ego is worried and concerned that people are talking behind his back. Anybody who walks into a room, anybody looks a little wrong at him, he gets concerned and worried what's going on. Ego is worried about the future. Ego is never happy. On the other side of the battlefield, you have self-esteem. Self-esteem is happy. Self-esteem is confident. Self-esteem says, I'm not going to get caught up with a pleasure which is here now and gone in a minute from now. I'm going to invest time because I'm a real person. I care. I'm a respectable human being. And I'm going to invest the time it takes to gain appreciation for things which are truly meaningful in life, which are going to carry real meaning and true joy, not a moment of satisfaction. Self-esteem is not so worried when someone says something which he doesn't like. Self-esteem says, this is who I am. My life has too much purpose for me to get caught up with a few words that someone said about me. Self-esteem is confident. Self-esteem knows how to tackle a challenge. And both the ego and self-esteem are fighting to conquer the heart and mind of the human being. The battle is constant. Sometimes the ego gains some ground. Sometimes the self-esteem gains some ground, fighting back and forth. My dear friend, ego is deadly. Ego destroys the human being. Not only does ego destroy the human being and self-esteem brings so much happiness and joy and success, but ego destroys society as a whole. If you look at history, unfortunately, human history is scarred with generations killed by ego. To take one example, Napoleon. Napoleon was a man of great ambitions. And I'm sure he had some, true motive behind what he wanted to do, but there's a lot of ego involved. And finally, after the whole story was over, he managed to all but destroy France. He's sent into exile, but he couldn't stand. He couldn't just sit back and realize he lost it. And, so many people died for him to try to accomplish his ambitions. Let life move on. Let people live. He couldn't stand it. And less than a year later, he comes back to France, trying to reconquer. But his self-esteem says, stop it. You know you're not going to be successful. It's not going to work. But his ego can't stop. Because to his ego, if I don't conquer it all, I'm nothing. I might as well take a chance. 50,000 more people are going to die from my ego to try to gain a little more headway. The ego doesn't know when to stop. The ego can't stop. The ego is never satisfied. The ego is not rational. And then you have times where the self-esteem gets a say and accomplishes something. But unfortunately, throughout history, so many times, the self-esteem actually accomplished something, but up to a point. It stopped. Think about it. Why did it take thousands of years of civilization for people to design a democracy the way we have it here in the United States? It's something so ingenious that it took almost 6,000 years to come up with such an idea of a true democracy where all people are equal. Aren't these the God-given rights? Were there no wise people in the days of old? 6,000 years to think of a true democracy. What's going on? And if you look throughout history, many times people tried. They came up with ideas of more equality, freedom for more people, but always up to a point. Their self-esteem accomplished up to one point, and finally ego said, that's it. Too much. We can't go further. And time again, the ego put a stop to that progress. The ego put a stop to really bringing the idea of democracy and freedom and equality. The ego couldn't stand it. In ancient Rome, before Caesar took over, there was democracy, but up to a point. We can't have real democracy because then the leading figures would lose their power. Democracy up to the point. Many historians say the greatest gift that President Washington brought to the United States was not winning the War of Independence, was his decision to leave office. The ego would say, be a dictator. That was the norm at the time. But George Washington's self-esteem took the better of him and said, for the benefit of this country to have a real democracy, we're going to show a shining example of what it means to put an ego aside and focus on a cause which will bring real happiness, lasting happiness, and good for all people. And throughout American history, slowly, the idea of democracy developed. At the beginning, slavery, there was still a little ego involved. Self-esteem couldn't conquer it all because ego said, how much could I go? Throughout history, we're on this journey. But it's a difficult journey because ego won't let up. And we see over and over and over again how destructive ego is. Ultimately, ego never wins. It's always depressing. Ego is never happy. It can't be happy because ego never has enough. And self-esteem brings so much joy. Self-esteem focuses on what's really important in life and always wins at the end. Ultimately, always has the joy which he sacrificed for. Who's laughing today? Napoleon or George Washington? Self-esteem demands a lot of investment, a lot of hard work. It's not the enticing option. It's not the option which is attractive because it's so difficult. But it's that option which is true. It's meaningful. It's human. It has real value. And my dear friends, that's what the message of Matzah is. That's Torah's definition of humility. Torah's message of humility is not put yourself aside, forget about you. No, it's just the opposite. Torah's message of humility is be a real human being. Respect yourself. Don't give in to the ego and lose your dignity for some cheap pleasure, for microwave pleasure here today and gone in a moment. Invest. Be real. Your life will be so meaningful. Have so much joy and passion and excitement. It's going to be authentic. That's the beautiful message of Passover. That's the message of humility that Matzah represents. My dear friends, this Passover we have that opportunity to tap into that energy. The energy of Matzah and Passover liberation to make us real, truly free people.